Paul O'Connor, thank you so very much for showing up today and talking about Badaxe. Jake is the reason for all of this because he finds issue 3. He pulls it out. We watch it on our review it in surprise on our comics that influence, and we were just completely bowled over by it. So I reached out. You came back and said yes, and we are here, and we want to just know everything there is to know about Badaxe. So once again, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you. It's it's not every day you get a phone call or a email about a comic you did 35 years ago, almost 1989. I think is when this came out. It would have been 26, maybe 27 when I wrote this book. So,
Well, hopefully it's not 30 years from now when you get the next call. But yeah,
well, I've had, it's bizarre. Maybe they're clustering because I have had 2 in the last couple of years because I was contacted out of the blue during the pandemic by the editors at Sir Silva magazine, and they picked up Badaxe for a reprint. Now, I've never had a comic reprinted ever.
right.
They did collected trades or something back when they were originally published, but they have something like that appear, and that was a similar sort of like dollar box discovery or nickel box discovery like you guys made. So I don't know,
Mhm.
something's in the air for Badaxe. Long overdue, but it's getting its day in the sun. I'm delighted.
Well, yeah, the good stuff kind of filters to the surface. We do this comics that influence thing where we kind of flip through comics that we come across, and sometimes we're surprised at what we find, and and Kurt reaches out. But just the basics. So, where are you coming to us from today?
I'm in Encinitas, California. I'm
Okay.
about 5 minutes from the sand here at Beach Town, about
Hmm.
20 minutes north of San Diego.
Right. Okay. Cool. So, Kurt, I know you have like a list of questions to begin us off with. You want to jump right
Oh
in?
well, I mean the bigger part was just going through the inspiration would be the perfect question on why choose the characters and the setting and then
Sure.
moving forward and then obviously that dovetailing into working with Kent and James. So give us some of that background, please.
Sure. Well, it's kind of a two-part question. I can tell you a bit about the business circumstances at Malibu Comics at the time that allowed this product to
Cool.
get into print. And I can also tell you about my inspiration for it. I'll do the business first if you like.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Malibu Comics started in 1988-ish, I think, 87, 88. I was one of their first guys. I was best friends with their new editor-in-chief, Chris Ulm. He fed me a lot of work over the years. I did a lot of original titles for them. One of the things they did at Malibu is they bought up other comic book lines. So at this time, they had Eternity as an imprint, they had Aircell as an imprint, and Steve Milo was running Adventure Comics. And the air had sort of gotten out of the black and white balloon, and he was looking for someone to take over that line. So he did. So Scott Rosenberg bought into Adventure Comics and brought it over to Malibu. But they started all new titles. They had a story there, had a comic there called The Adventurers, which
Yeah.
Kent was the
Yeah.
artist on. But as I understand it, I talked with Tom Mason, the creative director of Malibu, just the other night, and he told me that the contract rates for that Adventure Comics had in place were too rich for Malibu, and they basically canceled everything and needed to start a new line of comics.
Oh.
So so Chris knew that I was a fantasy guy, and I think solicited. I said, "Do you have an idea? Do you have an original idea?" I said, "Well, I don't, but I can come up with one." And that was the business imperative for starting Badaxe. As far as the creative side is concerned, it's an homage. It's a pastiche. It represents all my kind of youthful obsessions with Robert E. Howard and Edgar Rice
Yeah.
Burroughs,
Yeah.
with a healthy sprinkling of Joseph Campbell in there too. At the time, I was really obsessed with prizing apart the hero with a thousand faces, the hero myth that forms the backbone of the story. That's its outline basically. But in addition to honoring those forms and writing that kind of story, I wanted, of course, you wanted some things that were original in there. So I went specifically for very modern syntax. I didn't have them talking like Stan Lee pseudo Shakespearean Thor dialogue. There's some deliberate anachronisms in there. There's gunpowder. I want to do gunpowder fantasy. So it's a little bit of everything, but the primary influences would be Robert E. Howard and Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Hmm. And so yeah, it's a good way to talk about it, is like, the business side and the creative side, because when you go over the history of all the Marvel characters, and you realize how much the business side influenced the creative side, the decisions that were made. And you know talk a little bit about the pairing between you and the artists. It was this the first time working with him, and how did that come together?
Yeah, first, last, and only time. And I'm afraid I have no stories to share there because the nature of the way Malibu did comics at the time, they turned them around so fast that there was no
Mm,
opportunity for collaboration at all. So I've never even corresponded with any of the other artists that were involved in this particular product.
wow.
So
Um,
you just
so
turned in a script, and they
yeah,
gave it to an artist.
yeah, I worked full script. So it'd take me about 3 days to write a script, and then I'd send that in, and then I occasionally I'd have some input on selection of penciler, but I think it was already in place for this particular book. And then after the pencils came back, I'd get Xeroxes of them and I'd do balloons. So the ballooning guide was my responsibility, and I'd draw on it and I'd number them, and that gave me an opportunity to go do another edit on the script. But
Huh.
then it would go to the letterer, and I wouldn't see it till it came out in print.
Interesting. So you saw the pencils before it was inked. You added your dialogue, and then
Yeah,
it goes back
yeah,
for another
yeah.
round.
And to be fair, I mean, I would love to have met Kent, and I'd love to have met James and the people on the project. And one of the reasons I ultimately became dissatisfied with comics, at least in this at this company, was that it didn't permit for that kind of collaboration. And it's an inherently visual medium. And as a writer, your best idea is not the best idea. So it would have been better if we had time that we could actually collaborate. That we could start with a plot, we could do thumbnails together, we could dialogue over those, but the deadlines were just so tight it couldn't permit it. So you had to take your best shot writing a comic script, trying to imagine visually, make it as good as you can, and then trust that you have a talented collaborator at the other end of the line. Even if you're in two rooms, you never speak to each other, they will wisely decide to emphasize something and de-emphasize something else. And I'm sure that was the case here. I don't remember specifically, but none of the artists ever followed the script exactly. They have their own interpretation, and that's one of the reasons why when it comes back to you for ballooning, it's an opportunity to edit, and if something's missed, you can include it. If something is made clear, you can pull it out.
Right. And so,
So, well,
go,
they're just how is your reaction to Ken's
that's what I was going to ask.
interpretation visually? Yeah, yeah, it was
Well, I was very pleased. I recognized. I'm sure that Chris sent me a copy of Adventurers before I started on this, so I knew who the artist would be, and I also knew that Adventurers was a successful book, and that was important as well
right,
because I'm trying to make a
right.
living off this stuff. So I figured we had a good chance for success. He had some built-in fan base, and that with the imprimatur of Adventure Comics, we might get some eyeballs. People would come over and take a look at us. And I thought he was, I thought he was good. It's not like I gave him an easy task. You have a page right there where there's a horse. Horses are notoriously
Exactly.
difficult for
Oh
artists to draw.
yes.
And there's a lot of characters, and it's like 5 or 6 main characters in a relatively short story. And also with a fantasy book, it's not just a fantasy book. You have to build a world around it. You have to decide, what does the armor look like? What is the architecture? What is the flora, the fauna, what are the insignias, the flags? Everything has to be designed, and
Yeah.
that's a huge burden on an artist as well. So I thought he did a fine job. And as a black and white book, the inks and the tones gave it kind of a moody cast to the whole production. It's unique among the books that I did, certainly, to have this particular book. So I was quite pleased with it.
Yeah, if you go back to our original flip through of it, I was telling Kurt, like, all right, I'm about to open this up, and look, I don't know if this is going to be good or bad. And you can see as we go through it, we
Yeah,
start
because
mentioning all of the flora and the fauna and the armor,
yeah,
and all of the things that you're talking about, that that meticulously intentional. We notice that as readers, and so, and also the horses, also the complication. So everything you're saying really resonated with us on the end user, and so people listening should take note of that, sweating the details. And it's great when you can work with somebody who, you know, turns out a professional product and an eye-catching product too. So I guess, you
But
know,
be
some of it,
subtle. Be
yeah,
subtle. That's the thing. That's the thing that, if with Paul indicating in the script and Kent picking up on it, when I did go back and watch the video this morning, and that's exactly what we were. Oh, check this thing out! Like, oh, this is really the armor. And it's the unraveling of the world instead of getting clobbered over the head with it.
Yeah. Well, it's it's a wordy comic, certainly by contemporary standards, and it's dense, right? Contemporary books are decompressed. This would be a 6 or 9 issue story if it were published today, right? I don't necessarily think I would make
Yeah.
it better. But the style is very much, it's that Robert E. Howard style, or because it's comics, it's kind of a Roy Thomas style. It has a lot to do with the way he wrote his Conan books in the 70s and the 80s, which were, I love, great influence on me. Here's my copy of Savage Sword #1 right here. I just,
Sweet.
Nice. Right. So I love those books. But I think, Thomas did a lot of heavy lifting with the way he described the Hyborian age and the characters and the emotions, etc. But his artists, and he was teamed, most notably, you remember him with Barry Smith, and you remember him with John Buscema. But in Barry Smith's case, he went crazy trying to actually draw everything, and I think that's one of the reasons he didn't last so long in the book, as brilliant as he was. But Big John had that cartoonist sensibility where he could, like Ditko had this too, where he could draw your eye to what he wanted you to see. He used a series of recycled poses, but they're great poses. So in any given panel, there's a thing to see. It's not everything to see. So in this panel, the important thing is I'm seeing Conan be clouted across the back of the head with a wine jug, and that's what's there, right? And then another scene, this is more an establishing shot. I want to see the plains of Shem, and I want to see a city, and I want to see some smoke rising from it. And then he does that. He doesn't try to do everything in every panel. Kent kind of did everything in every panel here. I mean, he really went for it, which I appreciate, but it'll kill you over time.
But this page. I'm sorry, keep going.
No, that's it. That's my whole insight and wisdom to budding pencilers out there is pick the most important thing in a panel, pick the most important thing in a page, make that thing work, and then add other things as you have time. But make sure that you really punch that one particular storytelling point and build.
Do you remember what you had asked to be on this splash page? Did you remember?
I'm sure I called it out as a full page shot. Probably because when I wrote full script, I did do panel breakdown. So a script would read, page X, panel 1, caption, panel 1, there'd be a description of the action, and then I'd break it out by paragraph, caption, balloon, name, right, and I'd do the next one. But so it was pretty tight. And if an artist just wanted to let me drive, they could do it. It wouldn't necessarily be the best choices because I'm a writer and I'm not an artist, and I try to think visually, but it's not the same as sitting over the board and actually bringing the world to life.
Right. So this would have just been like an establishing, this is Badaxe's.
Yes, the Citadel of Fire. So probably it's possible Kent decided to give it a full page, but more likely I called for that in the script.
Okay.
And it would be because I recognized it was an establishing shot, and it was also, it was a culmination, it was a climax. It was sort of it's near the end of the story, and you're seeing this place for the first time. It was very important. So I would have called it out as such.
It's like the Death Star.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's great. Speaking to the Joseph Campbell, and you're on the tail of the Star Wars phenomena, that it caused in our culture, and especially popular culture. And this is 82, so you're that wave
whatever.
is.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was thinking. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right. So, but you're still riding that as a part of giving that level of feeling to it in storytelling.
Well, I thought it was fascinating that Campbell went in and you read some of his work and he's kind of shooting an arrow at the wall and painting a bullseye around it, right? But in other cases, he's really found something, and I found it fascinating. But also, as a fan of the pulps, and I regarded myself as a pulp writer, maybe more even than a comic book writer. And the pulp guys were formula guys because It's like, hey, I need 40,000 words for Doc Savage magazine, and I got to do it in, in 2 weeks. So I better get to work. So they were very formulaic, and I never considered a formula a problem. I was always looking for formulas. So when I got into reading Campbell, I thought, well, here's a formula. I can deconstruct this, and I can try to. At one point,
Mm.
I had it broken down into 22-page comic book beats, which was, but I generally would do it over 4 issues. Badaxe ended up being 3, which is one of the reasons it might feel a little crunched, a little crazy, especially in the third issues, because I didn't have as many pages as
Mm.
I might normally have for that outline. But a lot of it just came from this idea of, okay, I make $250 for writing a comic script. I have 3 days to write the script. How can I do that reliably 5 times a month so I can pay my rent?
Right.
That was where the formulas came in, and then I just learned to embrace them, and I'm still a great lover of formula fiction.
Yeah, so that brings up a question. Bring us through what had been your credits and your career up to Badaxe, and then after we'll
Well,
ask you after.
it wasn't much, to be honest, right? So I broke into comics, quote unquote, in I think '87 maybe was my first book, and everything was published through Malibu or one of its imprints, with rare exceptions. I ended up publishing a couple other places, but it was years later. Part of that was because I knew how to do the work, but I didn't know how to do the business, and I wasn't great at networking, and I just kind of had this naive belief: you do good work, and they'll come find you. They'll bring you up to the big leagues, and you'll write Captain America or something. That never happened. Instead, what I did is I continued to write for Malibu and did about, I don't know, 70, 80 books for them over the years. And it started all as original titles. One of the things that was they were great guys, and one of the things that was most encouraging about them is they were early supporters of creator rights and made sure that everything reverted to the artists and the writers. They came up. I mean, they knew Jack Kirby pretty well. They came up during an era where there was a lot of fights between Marvel and Jack over getting his work back. So they decided, we're not going to do that.
Mm.
We're going to be a creator rights company. So it's good. I do original stuff for them, but the market is remorseless, and the air was going out of the black and white boom even as we got started at Malibu. And
Mm.
pretty quickly they had to pivot to licensed books or books that had already had a footprint. So I ended up writing like the reboot of X Mutants, for instance, which was an Eternity title. And that was owned by Malibu at that point. Or we do licensed books. I did a Three Musketeers book. I did or there'd be another creator that would have an IP that wanted an extended and didn't have time to do it. So Ben Dunn was with them at the time doing Ninja High School, but he also had a mecha series called Tiger X, and I wrote that for a couple issues. So it was really just kind of, what do you got? And that I didn't mind that so much either, because I was always developing my own ideas and would pitch them. And sometimes they'd get into print, sometimes they wouldn't. But mostly what you want is work. So if Chris would call me up and say, hey, we've got the rights to do a comic book adaptation of Lensman from the anime series, but don't you dare mention anything about the original Pulp stories because there's a problem with the licensor. It's like, okay, I'll figure that
Right.
out. I'm a big fan of the original Pulps. So I got to do almost everything at Malibu except superheroes, because we were black and white and we were alternative, and color
Right.
superheroes were done better by other properties, or other companies. So we never really did a superhero book, but almost anything else you can think of, fantasy or science fiction, adventure, we did it, or I did it.
And so, had you had any training? I took a comic writing course at the School of Visual Arts, where Denny O'Neil was the instructor, and man, I learned so much in those lessons and those weeks. Had you had any training, or was it like on the job? Did you have a mentor? How did you approach your craft and the professionalism?
None of the above. I wrote,
Mm.
I read comics, of course, since I was a little kid and was eager to try it, but there was nothing. There's absolutely nothing for me to go by. I no classes on the West Coast, certainly. Um, and I probably would have been intimidated by them, because I believe that, the schools that are on the East Coast primarily oriented around artists, and I'm not an artist. I would have benefited from
Hmm.
being in the class, certainly, but no, it was all self-taught from reading a million books and just deciding, working backwards and trying to figure out how to do it. But that was the era. I mean, now, if you want to go online and find an example of what a comic book script looks like, it's easy to find. Or you want to see thumbnails or pencils, or you want to see people talking about the process of creating comics, you can find that. There was no such thing. But and there wasn't really an internet, right? So everything had to be, go find a book. I wasn't terribly intimidated by it. That had been, I just came up at a time where those things were available. It was similar, my other job is in video games. I've been doing video games since I started those in the early 80s and been doing them continuously since 1992. But when I broke into video games in 1980, there were no, you can go to school for it. There was no
Right.
place. I just showed up on the job with a bunch of guys, programmers that were refugees from the defense industry, and said, "Well, I'm glad I'm not making missiles anymore. Let's figure out how to make games." It's like, okay, let's figure out how to make games. So I wasn't afraid to take big complex things and try to figure them out. And in that sense, comics was easier for me than games were, certainly early on.
Well, you knew about the formula, though. I mean, that
Yeah,
that's key. It's also what the publishers are looking for. Somebody that can plug into the formula so that their artists, can do, the deliver the expectable, amount of action and story, within the parameters. So, um,
So,
yeah.
Jake, before you keep going, I know where you're going to go, but the next question I have for how were you getting a hold of pulps? Were you literally going and finding them in old stores, like old
oh, yeah.
bookshops and stuff, or was there some other resource that you were utilizing? Because pulps were always very elusive, and you had to know the right people in the right places. So, did you know the right people in the right places?
Well, I did, but that isn't necessarily where it happened. I mean, my father, it's not like my dad had a vast collection or anything, but he would talk to me glowingly of G8 and the Battle Aces and how that inspired him to go into the Army Air Corps in World War II. When I was a little kid,
Wow.
when I was 12 years old, I had a phone call with Forrest Ackerman, who ran Famous Monsters
Oh,
magazine, and I went up to
wow.
his house. I was there for the day, went to his house, and got to walk around and see all the stuff. So, I mean, I was in a world. I grew up in Southern California, kind of adjacent to film. So the stuff, it was not, the notion that you can make a living using your imagination. These things were possible. That I believed in that, but there was no one that specifically came to me and said, "Here's how to do it." And my introduction to pulp fiction came through comic books because in '74 is when I really got into comics. I was 12 years old and I was reading those Conan books and I thought, these are cool. I love it. I always had a yearning for fantasy, didn't quite know what it was. You read the books and you go, oh, they're based on these Conan novels by Robert E. Howard. And you go to the bookstore and you find them, they were
Ah.
reprinted at the time. So that was my way in. And also, I think as a kid, before that, like some Doc Savage books showed up at the school book fair, and I bought a couple of those. So there was always just that was just my thing. And my dad recognized that he was a fan of he loved the movie serials. He was a big fan of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, and we go to the movies all the time. So it was just encouraged to like indulge yourself in this stuff, take it seriously, have fun. So I just read it, liked it, fan of horror movies and comics, and also just kind of knew from an early age that I probably would be a writer in some fashion in my life. It was a sense, there was an expectation almost of me to do it, and sitting there pounding out stories on my typewriter as a little kid, trying to learn these things. So when the opportunity came for me to write comics, I went for it. Absolutely, I went for it. If I had been tapped on the shoulder and given an opportunity to write short story science fiction tales or pulp novels, I probably would have done that too. But the opportunity emerged for comics, so that's where I went.
Nice.
Right on. So, I went on your comics Vine because I wanted to see if I had anything else that you had done,
Okay.
and I came across these two. It said that you had done a bunch of. Oh no, I'm sorry. I came across these two.
Yeah.
Um, it said that you had done a bunch of Ex Mutants, but I don't think this was one
Yeah.
of them. Right?
Yeah, that's the original line from Amazing, and that was boy. I would love to have made the money that those guys did, right? Because X Mutants from under Amazing, it came out in the early part of the black and white boom, made just ungodly amounts of money, and then it ran down. And Amazing and X Mutants got bought up, or there was some kind of handshake deal with Scott Rosenberg at Malibu, and it came over to us, and then we
Right.
relaunched it. And I wrote that was probably my longest run at Malibu. I think I probably was on for 17, 18 issues of X Mutants and New Humans, which was their spin-off book, which also came over from Amazing. And then that other book there you have, Shattered Earth Chronicles, was an idea to do like an anthology book, short story book set in the same universe IP. So I did a lot of those. Those were kind of like in my later years with Malibu. So there was original creation in it, but those were company characters. It was Malibu's
Uh-huh.
equivalent of, writing a Spider-Man book or something. Here's a company character. Do the best you can with it.
Right. Interesting. It's interesting to know because there was like a boom and then kind of like a slowdown, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely there was. And the direct market came of age. Black and white books were inexpensive to produce. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had become this unexpected gigantic success, and everyone was chasing the next hot thing. So uh,
Yeah.
it was, comics in most ages, certainly in that age, were driven by, um, it was a bubble. It was driven by speculator interest, and the black and
Bad.
white space was a bubble on top of a bubble where things were printed very rapidly and you just didn't know what you were going to get. And people buy just gillnet dozens of books every week from the shop and put them in bags and never even look at them, just hoping that something would flare up. So there was money, but it wasn't always driven by quality. Sometimes it was just driven by concept. And then sometimes, the quality of the book could transcend the concept. The Turtles book certainly started as a joke, but it's a beloved IP. It's a great story, and it's vital
Yeah.
still today. But for every Turtles, there are hundreds or thousands of ideas that didn't go very far.
And so, what do you remember about the market and the distro back then? Because when I got into comics in the '90s, you
Mm.
could just do like a cover and then have a blurb and put that into the Diamond previews, take
Yeah,
pre-orders on that, and just based on an idea, you could have a hit on your hands. And then then you had a couple of weeks to make the comic,
yeah.
or months to make the comic and deliver it. So what was it like back then when when you guys when they were kind of throwing ideas against the wall and looking for the next big score?
It's you read the stories of the old pulp magazines or the early movie guys, and I think it's very similar, which is we've got a market. Let's try to reverse engineer and figure out what the market wants and be successful, as opposed to I have this vision, this character. I mean, with Badaxe, it was kind of a passion project, so it's unusual. But in most cases, it's like, how can we make it work? And the guys at Malibu, specifically Tom Mason and Chris Ulm, Dave Ulbrich, who all worked with Scott Rosenberg there, that you were able that you the way you just characterize the way comics are made, they kind of made they're kind of the guys that pioneered that. I mean, it was because the direct market was what it was. They were quick to realize, what, our customers are not readers, our customers are retailers. So how do we appeal to a retailer? Okay, well, we get a great cover image and we get a name character and we get a great blurb. But they recognized it was important to win the solicitation, and they also understood that you're going to get some eyeballs for issue number one, and then you're lucky if you get a number two ultimately. So
Yeah.
the business ended up being heavily driven by solicitation and what you could get across in a Diamonds preview. And they were guys that were really laser focused on making that happen. That's
Right.
not
Even
didn't necessarily lead to a better business, but it did allow them to stay in business long enough to ultimately be acquired by Marvel. One of the few cases of a company from this era exiting successfully, not just going out of business or being owned by their printer.
yeah. Right. Yeah. So
How about your favorite comics? Not even having to go back to your past, but are there still comics that you kind of lean back on as inspiration?
Oh yeah, well I think the golden age of everything is 12. So it's not hard to figure out what books you're going to love. But what did you love when you were 12 years old or 15 years old or whenever you
Ah,
love comics, right?
yeah, mine's
So I've
14.
been, yeah, there you
Ninjas,
go, right?
ninjas.
There you go. Find it, right? Like I was recently rereading the Claremont and Byrne run of X-Men, which I thought was tremendous back in the day.
Yeah,
I've
how
yeah.
can you
got,
afford it?
the guy that really messed me up. Uh, this guy is Alan Moore, right?
Oh
He
boy,
he
yeah,
cast an extraordinarily long shadow during the era when I was trying to break in and write comics. He's a freaking genius.
Yeah.
And this one here, I kept specifically. It's the anatomy lesson issue, Saga the Swamp Thing. Most brilliant invention of a comic character I've ever read, certainly. So
Huh.
Moore just came in from the wasteland and just slayed. Just everything he wrote
yeah.
was nothing you've ever seen
Annihilated.
before.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I was a great fan of his, still am. I read Jerusalem, read his book, right? I think he's a genius, and I'm happy to read anything he puts on paper. But it kind of messed me up as a writer because I compared myself to Alan Moore. Well, good luck. Nobody, there's only one
Yeah.
Alan Moore. You can't do that. So that's a good way to get discouraged or get disappointed in your own work. But I'll still go back and read his stuff every once in a while. Not into comics as much as I used to be. I had a comics blog for years called Longbox Graveyard that ran for about 12 years. I wrapped it up a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And I was pretty involved then. And, looking back at my favorite Marvel and DC haunts, I was a big fan of the Jim Starlin cosmic books. Um,
Yeah.
and I loved Daredevil. Gene Colan era Daredevil was a big favorite, and of course all the fantasy books. Conan and Red Sonja and John Carter. Those were all favorites as well.
So this is where Kurt and I usually ask you to turn to the future and maybe offer something for any creators, budding creator would-be's that could be watching. We're in a very weird era right now. On the one hand, you see multi-million dollar blockbuster Marvel CGI movies using some
Yeah.
of these old characters, and then in the print world of comics, it's kind of depressing. The retail stores have dried up. Conventions seem to be pretty healthy, but it's kind of fragmented. There's also Kickstarter in there. And what would you say to somebody that wants to be a writer? How do you see things going for the next generation?
Well, if you specifically want to be a writer for comics, I would ask you a couple things. If you want total control of what you're writing, you really shouldn't be writing comics unless you have the capacity to also be an artist. Otherwise, you probably should be writing novels or short stories because that's where you have total control. So if you're going to write comics, um, recognize that it is a collaborative medium, and that's where your focus should be. Should be on finding strong partners that you can create art with together. And again, this is something I regret I didn't get the opportunity to do nearly as much as I would have liked. But
Mm,
it's more possible now than in my era because you have an internet and you have social networks, and you can find like-minded creators to make things
yeah,
together.
the
So
hookup
I think
sites.
if
Yeah.
yeah, so if you bring kind of an indie film spirit to what you're making, then I think there's a role for writers there. But also recognize that it's going to be a lot of heartbreak, and not everyone's going to be as committed to you as you may be, and people will let you down. They won't hit their deadlines, right? So
Right.
it's when you're working with other people, there's the opportunity for unexpected thunderbolts, but there can also be issues that are not your own. They're going to interfere with the work. But I think the first thing you got to do as a comic book writer is decide, I really want to work in this medium. There's something about comics, the visual combination of word and story with the passage of time implied by the gutter between panels. I really want to work in that space, and
Mm.
then work inside that space and find its strengths and annihilate its boundaries. If instead you are kind of like I was, really, it's like, well, I'm a pulp writer, but I get a chance to write comics, so I'm going to bring all this other sensibility and kind of hammer it into the books. Well, that maybe doesn't serve the art form as well as it should, and you should be writing something else. And it might be you should be writing screenplays, or you should be writing poetry or something. But if you decide comics are really it, interrogate yourself, find out why comics are really it, and then once you start telling stories, try to tell stories that can only or can be best told as comics rather than something else. And as an old timer, I get a little impatient when I read a modern decompressed big two superhero book that's page after page of minimal art
Oh,
alterations and a balloon
oh,
here, a balloon there. Like, I understand it, and
make me gag.
I love dialogue, and I love watching movies full of dialogue. But I've got movies full of dialogue. In comics, I need something else. I think you've let down the side a bit in terms of the way you use them to form. So my recommendation is, if you want to write comics, write actual comics. And if you find that you're writing something other than comics, recognize that and then go write that other thing. That's what ultimately I ended up doing in my career.
Yeah.
Are you reading anything right now in comics that you feel is really doing it justice as a medium?
Nothing current. I mean, I am like
Nothing.
I said, I'm kind of stuck in 1977 or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you
No, it's we're Jake and I are having the same issue.
yeah,
So
I mean, I thought Saga was a hell of a book. I mean, I enjoyed that, and there was this other one like here, right on my shelf, uh, Monsters from Barry Windsor Smith.
wow, yeah, I think that's gonna come from Santa Claus this year.
I
So
thought
I
I
got to
thought
get a copy
Monsters
of
was
that.
was I thought this was an absolute work of genius.
Yeah.
And I say that because for all the reasons I just mentioned, it's kind of a story that has no business being a comic book. Supposedly, it started as a Hulk story that Marvel wouldn't buy or something. But
Yeah.
Barry Windsor Smith displays such mastery of the form in telling the story. The story's not especially. I mean, you don't want to read it twice. It's not a happy book, right? But
Right.
he goes right at it, and all the things that are all the things I said don't do in comics, conversations, faces, emotions, subtleties. He does it all, and he does it really, really, really well.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a tremendous piece of work. So that's maybe I had forgotten about that, but that's that's kind of current, and I recommend it highly. But it's not a feel good story. It's not fun. It's not an MCU fist opera. It's something else.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and so you say some interesting things there. I've been watching in the forums where comics and where writers and artists kind of meet up to collaborate, and some writers are complaining that they're kind of secondary to artists.
Yeah.
Um, and they say, well, we'll write prose first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they are. Let's just be straight up. I mean, the best guys in our field, and I shouldn't be sexist, right? The best people in our field are the people that do art and story together, right? Go over here. I got Will Eisner. I got Frank Miller here, right? These are people that they could do it both, or Wally Wood, who I was really flattered because when you guys were showing Badaxe originally, it was on the same broadcast as a Wally Wood book. I mean, my goodness. Um, that's
That was dumb luck. Like I said, that was dumb luck.
okay. Dumb luck's my whole career, and I'll dine out on that story for the rest of the days. So, I mean, those are the people that really can push the form and know what they're doing. As a
Right.
writer, you're going to come to it. Maybe that's not you're not going to be the star necessarily. Now, there have been star writers in comics. There's been an era where it's been, Grant Morrison, or it's been Ed Brubaker, or it's been, whoever, and they're good writers, and people will go buy books because of them. Marvel has this era, this idea, behind Hickman or whoever. They said these architects are going to revitalize and change lines. They're almost like, studio heads or executive producers in the golden age of Hollywood. Have this vision or do certain movies that pertain to this vision. And so there's roles for writers for sure, and they're good writers. But ultimately, their work they're working in a visual field, and it is, in some sense, it is subordinate to the visuals. It may be vital. So if you want to be front and center, yeah, go write a book. So like I said, I work in video games, have done so for many years, and I'm a project director. And when my people come to me, and it's an inherently collaborative business, right? And people come to me and they don't want more control of this or that, I say, well, go paint a painting, go write a book, go write a song. If you want to control it, go do those things. But when you're
Yeah.
here, it's collaborative, and you don't have that kind of control. That's not what this form is about.
Jake, you still there?
Yeah, I had to turn my cough button on because I had
Oh, sorry.
total meltdown, but I'm still
You're also
alive.
echoing.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up. Paul cannot express our gratitude for you coming on and sharing this experience with Badaxe. So we also just want to give you the opportunity here on the way out to share maybe what you're working on, or anything inspirational,
Well,
motivational.
yeah, I appreciate that. I'm not currently working in comics. There might I mentioned Tom Mason a couple times in this call. I was talking with him last week. There might be something we do together in the coming year, but it's ways out. Um, Primarily working in games right now. I am trying to start a second career as a mystery writer, short story writer.
Yeah,
My first story was published in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine last month, which was
saw
nice. I
that.
got
Congratulations.
another half dozen. Yeah, I got another half dozen stories out, knocking on doors right now. I have a novel that I thought was done. It's not, and I'm rewriting it. So that's where I'm not working on games these days. I'm working on that. And if I do have a blog, and I'll send you guys the links, and you can post them if you like. That
Yes, please.
like I said, for years I had Longbox Graveyard, which was comics. The blog now is more, it's about fiction writing and crime fiction, but I do comics every once in a while. There's I have a review coming out shortly about the Boris Karloff Gold Key Mysteries book that was launched by the Revivified Gold Key. So I'm kind of doing it
those are great.
again. So those things are all. My blog is www.paulryano'connor.com. It's OCONNOR. So people can find me there. I'm on social media. Still have a pretty big Twitter presence, and we talk about comics every once in a while. But comics are funny. You think you're done with them, but maybe they're not done with you. And if a project lands on my lap, maybe I develop a lot of enthusiasm for it, and we'd go for it again. But there's nothing on the boil right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much. Jake, do you have anything for Paul before we let him go? You must be coughing.
Yeah, it must be.
Sorry.
All right.
No, thanks. It was really great to put a person to the to the great comic that we found. So thanks for letting us catch up with you.
My pleasure. I'm glad you enjoyed the book, and I'm glad you do what you do. I mean, you bringing your passion, your love for this unique art form to an audience, and you're doing your own work. That's ultimately the most important thing. I don't think you can engineer a hit. I spent a lot of time in my career trying to do that, and it just it's not going to happen. But if you get satisfaction from the work, if there's intrinsic value in what you do, that really is more than half the fight. And then maybe the one wisdom, if it can be branded as such, I've come to as a creator, is in a very real sense, you don't own the work after you've created it. Your job is to do the work. It's the job of writers and editors to decide if it's any good or not. Really, you as a creator do the best you can. You make a million decisions as you're creating the work, but after that, it's out of your hands. It really does belong to somebody else. And if you can let go of that, if you can not drive yourself nuts thinking, why didn't this hit? Or how come this is successful? Or trying to chase the success that someone else has made, and just do your own thing. I think that's the path of wisdom, and it might lead to fortune, I hope.
And to add to that, somebody once said to me, keep making.
Yeah.
That's all you can do. Just keep making. Just keep making. If you don't worry about everybody else. Right.
Yeah. If you don't do anything, then nothing will happen. You got to do something.
It's amazing.
And that like loops back to the question you asked earlier. Anybody can publish now, because it used to be everything had to be on paper, but you can if you want to make comics, you can make comics. Nobody can stop you from making comics or making film or making any kind of art. Just go do it.
Right.
And maybe the business success will follow, but you got to do the work first.
Yeah, and the good stuff rises to the top, even if it's 30 years later, right?
I hope so. Let's see if there's a big run on Badaxe, back issues now.
Yeah. Let's see. All right. Well, we're gonna let you go, Paul. Thank you so very much, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, gentlemen. My pleasure.